One thing you want to make sure you're doing as we work through this project, make sure you're saving frequently just in case Photoshop crashes or your computer fails in some catastrophic event, because that will happen. At some point, you'll have some kind of a deadline and then it'll crash. So make sure you're saving. All right, back to this paths window real quick. As you make your work path and as you're working through it, you'll have this work path option here. If you double click, you can name this path whatever you want. I just call mine cutout. It's just easy to remember, and it's basically my workflow on how I do everything. And simply by giving it a name, that path will stay with this image when you save it. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit File, Save, and I will drop this into my design files folder, and I just name it whatever the image was. In this case, when I've actually cut out a photo from my camera, dash cutout. So whatever the name, dash cutout. And the reason why I do that, you don't have to do that, but the reason why I do it that way is so if I ever needed to find the original, I could do a quick search for that IMG_7309 and find the original if I ever need to go back to it. So that's why I do that. I'll hit save. Again, make sure you hit it on format. You've got your on the format, you've got it set to Photoshop, and you've got your layer selected. That way you can come back through and grab this asset at any time. So I'm going to close that right now. And let's make a new document. I'll hit Command N or click on the new button here. And I'll just make another letter size paper. That worked really good if you want to do that. Or you are free to deviate and create your own size, whether you want to make something for maybe a web background like a desktop wallpaper or something. I'll hit OK. And I've got my paper size. And what I want to do, I actually want to change this. I didn't want it to be vertical. I want it to be horizontal. So I'm going to come over here to Image rotation, and I'm just going to move rotate this 90 degrees clockwise since I didn't have anything on here yet. And then feel free to drop in whatever background image you want to work with, or in this case if you want to work with one of the assets I've provided you. And I'm just going to scale this up a little bit and get it ready to go here. Perfect. Now what we need to do is start creating this visual effect by adding in our layers or our assets. So I will open up that file that I just closed. I could have left it open, but good practice for you to find where you're putting your files. We'll open up that Photoshop file we just cut out. Click on that image, drag and drop over into your new file, and then let go. Once we've got it in there, let's go ahead and hit Command S to save this now. And let's call it whatever you want. Composite image is great. And I'll save it in that design folder. All right, now that we're back in here, let's start with some simple housekeeping here. I'm going to hit Command T and shrink this down and get it kind of close to size. And then what I want to start working with now is the coloring of this piece. So I will come up here to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. And this will apply to whatever layer I had selected. So this camera raw filter is a great filter to use on any image, especially photography. But you can come in here and adjust the temperature, adjust the tint. Maybe it's a little underexposed or overexposed. We can add contrast, so we can really come through here and control exactly how our image looks. But before I get too far down the road here, let's just study this a little bit here. Let me Command T to shrink this down a little bit, get him a little more into the scene. Okay, and let's just think about where the light's coming from. Think about how bright things are. So the light's coming from top down, top left, or top left down to the bottom right. If we were to put this over here on the right side to really put him into the scene, we would probably have to deal with these windows shining at some point. So we would need to, for example, I could make a quick selection around his leg here. Hit Command Return to get that selection. I'm going to hit Command L to get my levels panel. And I'm just going to brighten it up a little bit. Hit OK. Command E to deselect, and now it looks like he's standing behind that sunlight, which is great. But the problem is now as soon as I go to move him back over here, his leg has been messed up. I didn't create a way for me to work in a non-destructive manner. So what that means is as you work through things, sometimes you want, maybe let's say you wanted to save this, like you were pretty happy with it, but we wanted to try and add that light effect here. I could hit Command J to make a new layer and do that effect we just did. Again, I use my pen tool to just kind of make a quick selection here. Command Return to get it. Command L to open up my levels. And I just brightened up the whites a little bit. So that way, if for some reason I want to go back to the other version, I can just turn that layer off and open a new layer. It didn't cost me anything to do that. You can have as many layers as you want, so it's a good idea to save layers at good stages along the way. So looking at this again though, he's a little bit lighter than the background, and I could actually probably make the background a little more dark and ominous as well. So what I'll do here is I'm going to click on this industrial layer, come up to filter, and jump to my camera raw filter. And I'm going to go ahead and bring the contrast or the exposure down just a touch. I could crank the exposure, or I'm sorry, the contrast up, or bring it back to soften it up. Maybe bring my highlights down so it's not quite so bright. I could bring the shadows down or expose the shadows to make the shadows seem brighter, which then makes my highlights not seem quite as bright, and balancing out the image. So again, just play with it, just play with it and see what makes sense for your image. And when you get it to a spot that you're happy, go ahead and hit OK. And now if I hit Command Z, I can toggle between what it was and what it is now. So you can see we made it a little bit darker, a little more contrast, but now he really stands out. So let's go back and adjust this layer as well. I'll come back to that filter, camera raw filter, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit here just so I can see him a little better. And I'm going to move things around just so I can see what the background looks like and try and get a better match. So we definitely need to bring down our exposure a little bit. Not too much, but definitely a little bit. And the contrast, it's probably fine where it's at. I usually come through and I grab each slider and I scrub all the way to the right, all the way to the left to try and find a good balance for where things need to be. So the whites obviously need back down just a touch. The blacks, same thing. We'll darken them up a little bit, bring up the clarity. And we'll hit OK and see what that does for us. So already it's looking a lot better, like he belongs in that environment. Now a few more things to seal the deal here. There's no shadows. If he was truly standing in this space, if we look at where some of these other shadows are coming across the room, we would need some kind of a shadow. So there's a lot of things we can do here. I could add a layer down below. Command click, hit the letter B to get my brush tool. And let's jump over here and grab my brushes, and we'll grab a soft brush, bring my size down a little bit. Maybe a little bit bigger than that. Bring my hardness down, turn off my spacing. And up here we've got opacity and flow. We'll turn this down a little bit. If it's at 100% and I start painting with, we'll just do green so you can see it. You'll see that I get a really opaque green. Now if I bring this opacity down and start scrubbing, you see it builds up, and I could keep building and adding to it. So what I could do here, I'll leave that layer, I'll add a new one. I'm going to hit the letter D to get my default swatches over here, which turns it back to black and white, or I could have double clicked on here and select a different color. But anyway, I'm just looking for black. So what I can do with this layer below the one above it is start to paint, and you'll notice that it doesn't paint over the top of him, it paints behind. So you can build up this effect and it becomes a lot more believable if I do it that way. So we can add some drop shadow here to really kind of anchor him down to this scene. So you can paint this by hand if you want to. Another way that I work sometimes, I'll click once on this layer, Command J to duplicate it, and I'll grab the layer below. I'll hit Command T, and I'll click while holding down the mouse. Now I'll hit the the Command button, and I can warp this and bend it down. Depending where the light is. In this case, I don't want him back behind, but I'll just show you the effect here. And now I'll hit the return key to commit it. Now what I want to do is lock right here. There's this tiny lock icon. With this layer selected, I'm locking the transparency. So now what I can do is hit Alt Delete to fill with my foreground color, and it'll only fill pixels that are there. It won't fill anything around it. Now if that wasn't selected and I hit Alt Delete, it fills the whole entire layer. So Command Z, make sure my alpha transparency channel here is locked. Hit Alt Delete to fill that now. So now what I've done, I'm going to delete these layers. Now what I've done is I've created kind of a shadow here, and to further make that look real, I can bring my opacity down a little bit, maybe change my blend mode from normal to multiply, and I could even work backwards and start maybe erasing away some of the shadow, because the true shadow wouldn't necessarily go all the way across. The other thing, what I like to do is I'll add a mask, a layer mask here. I'll hit the letter G to get my gradient tool. Up here I'm painting from the foreground color to transparent with a linear gradient. So what I'm going to do is, in a mask, black will hide and white will reveal. So I'm going to click from the head, come down to here, and now it's going to paint with a gradient from dark to light. So now I'm painting on this mask layer, and this mask, if I hold down shift and click, all it's doing is masking that shadow. It's not actually destroying it, but that way I get a smooth transition from his shadow. So go ahead and bring in your subject into whatever image you have. Start getting your colors right. Start playing with the levels. So that was Command L to bring up maybe the brightness, or the whites and the blacks to darken it up, or your levels here. So play with that effect a little bit. Play with your camera raw. Come up here to filter, camera raw, and try and get your background and your foreground color to be closer so they feel like they're in the same scene. We're going to do some more effects here in just a minute, but start there and then start painting in your shadows wherever you think there should be some shadow.